Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Health Matters with Laura Kopec. I'm your host, Laura Kopec, and today we're going to discuss a question that many of you might have or your friends might have, and that's, what is a naturopath? And what's a functional practitioner? And what's the difference between all of this? So let's dive in. I think the important thing is to start with a little bit of history of kind of how this all began. So if you go back to the beginning in biblical times, healers were priests and rabbis and shamans, and those were really the places that people went to have their medical needs addressed. Imbalances were often addressed in a mystical manner, but then an anointing with oil became one of the first ways that we started using herbs in a medicinal manner. Essential oils are mostly plants, and using it topically in an anointing manner turned out to be a one way that the body actually ingests. It's called transdermal. Then as you progress through time, healers became part of the way, but they kind of moved to this place as the idea of a doctor came forward. Surgeons in war for amputees were often assigned to the barber because they knew how to work a razor, which became a scalpel. And midwives, because they delivered babies, took on an extended role in addressing people's health. When medical schools finally came on the scene, doctors were originally naturopaths. They originally recommended natural ways of treating illness and disease. But as the conception of pharmaceuticals entered the scene and modern medicine kind of took over, there was this division between doctors who wanted to become more licensed to be able to make those prescriptions, those pharmacological recommendations, and then the naturopaths, those that didn't want to participate in making those recommendations, kind of stayed over here in this lane. Within the field of naturopathy, there has become a division, and a lot of it has to do with school and training and state laws. But the doctors then created this licensing board, and you had to go through the special medical school to even call yourself a doctor. And naturopaths became over here and very, very alternative. The division amongst naturopaths started at a time when some schools started to create more of a licensing, if you will. So for example, Bastyr is a well-regarded educational university in Seattle. And then they created licensing around what they provided as an educational model. And then the state of Washington required their naturopaths to have that kind of licensing or that kind of education. And different states that have kind of agreed to that kind of education have been part of why the naturopaths have divided. In places like Bastyr, you can even become a naturopathic MD, and it's an integrated model of being a naturopath, but also being an MD. And those are typically referred to as NMDs. And the traditional naturopaths still kind of maintain doing more very holistic, very alternative, that very natural way that individuals work to guiding people towards a better health and wellness. Through the years, because there is no regulation or licensing or anything surrounding traditional naturopaths, they're very different. I mean, doctors are going to be different in their bedside manner and the way that they like to treat. But overall, there's kind of an expectation about when you see an MD. And traditional naturopaths are kind of all over the place. And some rely on more herbs and nothing else. I myself, as a traditional naturopath, really rely on supplements, nutraceuticals, more vitamins, minerals, that kind of thing. And as a functional practitioner, that's where things get a little bit different too. So what is a functional practitioner? Functional is looking for the root cause or looking for the cause in diagnostic medicine. So let's call traditional doctors part of, sometimes they're called allopathic, and instead of naturopathic, which is more natural, but let's call it the diagnostic model. The American Medical Association says that doctors, by the code, need to diagnose and treat. And so under a diagnostic model, a doctor will diagnose the condition and often treat the symptom, as opposed to looking for why the body might be completely out of balance. As a functional practitioner, the number one thing that a functional practitioner should be doing is looking for the cause, looking for what is underlying the body being out of balance. And again, everybody is going to do this differently as a functional provider. I myself rely on a lot of clinical data and functional testing. So that typically might be the second thing that you can see a functional provider do, and that's offer functional testing. What is functional testing? It's very different from diagnostic testing. It's like comparing apples and oranges. They're really looking at two different things. And in optimizing your health, sometimes it might be really appropriate to actually have both looked at. Do the diagnostic, where you have that information surrounding acute disease management, but also considering that there could be something underneath it. I'll give you an example. People with heartburn, they go see a doctor. Most of the time, they're going to be on an antacid, proton pump inhibitor, something to relieve the symptom, to treat the symptom. So somebody's not in discomfort or pain. There's not acid coming up against their esophagus. In functional medicine, the question is, why is somebody actually having heartburn? So in my practice, I might do a panel of looking at, is there low stomach acid production, which the treatment of the symptom as an antacid is actually making the underlying problem even worse. So as a functional provider, practitioner, I might be looking at, is that the reason why somebody is having heartburn? Because the valve between the stomach and the esophagus, if it doesn't have enough stomach acid to regulate that closure, then the acid is bubbling up. Acid's really important for nutrient absorption. And so people with low acid that are taking an antacid to keep the acid off their esophagus, they may actually be having some malnourishment, some nutritional deficiencies that lead to other symptoms. They may have low immunity because they don't have that first line of defense. They may suffer from constipation. There could be a whole trickle down effect. And so one of the primary ways that a functional practitioner should be working with individuals is time-based. So as a functional practitioner, it's really important to me that I spend the time with somebody to really examine what's going on, because for me, it's all about connecting those dots. It's about looking at the whole body and going, look, the constipation you have is actually related to this. The anemia you have is actually related to what's going on in your stomach. You go to a doctor and you're diagnosed with anemia, then you might also be recommended to take iron and not look at why you're not absorbing iron. Even iron supplements are really difficult to absorb because the underlying problem is the absorption of the iron to begin with from food. So it's not always easy enough to get the absorption from an iron supplement. And so sometimes even more constipation ensues. Even in hormone testing, I do this beautiful functional hormone panel. If somebody's cortisol is high, that may be why their progesterone is low. That's just an example of something that can happen. If you go and just get the diagnostic testing, you're going to understand that your progesterone is low, but are you going to have somebody help you calm your adrenals if that's part of the underlying cause as to why the progesterone is doing that to begin with? So for me, it's really important to have that information. Why wouldn't you want to have that information and really get to the bottom of what is going on in your health? I think that we could really take the time to take charge of our health in a really unique way and understand, okay, my functional testing says if I eat this, this is going to happen. And it doesn't necessarily mean you change your diet all the time. Maybe it does. But it may mean that you just have a better understanding of what is happening in your body. And you're not just going, sometimes I'm just tired all the time. I don't even know why. The other thing that I find that happens is people can go for diagnostic testing and nothing turns up. And then they do functional testing and a bunch of stuff is out of range because it's not enough to create an acute illness or disease. It's not enough for a diagnosis. It's not enough. But it's chronic, it's systemic. And so sometimes people can be recommended that this is just depression, or they can be given a medication that might not even match what's going on if it's a functional issue, because what they really needed to do was look at a deeper level in functional testing. Okay, what's the difference between holistic, integrated, and functional, right? So I'm a naturopath, a functional nutritionist, and a functional practitioner. I wear a lot of hats. I have a lot of different education that kind of put this together for myself, specializing in genomics, which is also to me part of looking at your health in a risk assessment and determining where your risks are so you can optimize how you're taking charge of your health. Holistic is usually natural. Some holistic providers are just holistic. They're just natural. That means you come in constipation, you may get an herb to relieve the constipation. That's natural. That's not a prescription. It's not necessarily functional. Taking an herb to relieve the constipation relieves the symptom, but it doesn't do the deep dive into why somebody is having constipation. Integrated. This was a term that began when MDs started practicing more holistically. So a doctor who might hesitate to recommend an antibiotic or use an omega for high cholesterol or blood pressure before looking at prescriptions, that's more of an integrated model. That doctor may or may not have advanced training. Now, a doctor that is practicing as a functional practitioner, but is not fully functional, it may look like this. They may do functional testing, but they may not spend the time going over a person's health in depth on a continual basis. It may be, we're going to use functional testing, but we may not spend the time. We may make holistic recommendations. We may do an integrated model. So again, integrated is a doctor that will function both diagnostically and holistically, and they will create a model for themselves that works. Okay, again, integrated is usually found with doctors, and that is a model where they're taking their diagnostic traditional way of practicing, combining it with a natural and more holistic. Could that integrated practitioner also practice as a functional practitioner? Sure. What does that look like? Again, they may be a functional practitioner in the sense they offer functional testing, but may not offer a time-based practice. So they've added functional testing to their integrated model. What is a functional practitioner? Ultimately, a functional practitioner is looking for cause and looking for the things that underlie the symptoms. Basically saying your body is out of balance. What do we need to do to bring it back in balance? functional practitioners will use functional testing to get to the bottom of that. And then a functional practitioner should be time-based. That's an ideal way of practicing, because really to go over a person's health systemically for chronic conditions, looking at everything, diet, lifestyle, supplements, testing, that does take time. And it is, in my opinion, really important to spend that time. And then again, what is a naturopath? Well, a traditional naturopath is going to practice very old school, very natural. How they define the style and way in which they do that is going to be up to them. And then NMDs or licensed naturopaths, they may be more of an integrated model. And so they may be doing a little bit of both, or they may be under a licensing umbrella that exists for their state. Okay, well, that is the explanation of the history of how we came to this place of having doctors, integrated doctors, naturopaths, both NMDs and traditional, and how we can start to ask questions about what a provider provides so that you know going into it, okay, am I going to get somebody who is completely natural and not functional? Am I going to get the broadest scope of a functional practitioner who approaches it functionally, functional testing and time? Am I looking at an integrated model, and does that include any aspect of being a functional practitioner? So as always, I really love for my podcast to unpack things, demystify, really clarify things, because unless we have the right information and the right conversations, we're really limited in how we can take charge of our health. And it's really important to understand your body and to understand the choices that you can make so that you can be in the best care possible, the best team if you want to put together a team. But how do we really have the information we need, make the choices we can so we can truly empower ourselves and take charge of our health? I'm so glad you joined me today. I hope you'll join me again. Pass on the video podcast. I hope you'll join me again for another episode of Health Matters with Laura Kopec. Don't forget, all my episodes are for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for medical advice. Only your doctor can diagnose and prescribe. I wish you the very best, and I look forward to you joining me again. Thank you.